Thanks, everybody. Before we go to the final part of the program, please indulge me for a couple minutes here for a few thank yous. As you all know, this event doesn't happen on its own. And first, I'd like to thank everybody in the room. You've been a fantastic group. Really appreciate the excellent participation today. You deserve a round of applause. I'd like to thank Joanne Drank and the entire Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation Institute team. Have done a remarkable job making this day happen. It is no small feat getting all of these amazing people in front of me where they have to be on time and do this amazing program. So please thank them as well. To the members of the Ronald Reagan National Defense Forum Executive Committee, my colleagues Bob Cochran, Meredith Steza, Shala Seaborn, of course, my boss, the Executive Director of the Foundation, John Hybush, thank you so much for all the support in putting this program together. And to the amazing trustees of the Foundation, thank you so much for your participation today. In the room we have Ben C. Sutton Jr., Governor Pete Wilson and his wife Gail, Andrew and Karen Littlefair, Michael Castine, and of course, Chairman of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation Institute, Fred Ryan, who's going to come up here right now and introduce our final guest. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, it's no secret where our next guest gets his inspiration on foreign policy. He's written that American leadership must be committed to a national security policy of peace through strength. He has said America's role abroad is, quote, serving what Ronald Reagan called us, the beacon of democracy, the beacon of freedom, the beacon of liberty. And oppressed people around the world look to the United States for help, he explained, because, quote, we are, as Ronald Reagan said, the last great hope for democracy. You can see why we here at the Reagan Library are pleased not only that Robert O-Brien is joining us today, but that he now serves as National Security Advisor. In addition to a Reagan-esque vision for foreign policy, Robert brings to his job impressive experience. He served the United States honorably on the world stage in both the Bush and Obama administrations. Most recently, he led our country's efforts to secure the release of Americans held hostage abroad. His successes have reunited families and saved U.S. citizens from horrifying fates. We look forward to getting Robert's unique perspective on the challenges and threats America faces and on the solutions he believes that can help us to address them. He'll be discussing these topics in what is sure to be a fascinating conversation moderated by Bill Hemmer of Fox News. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the 28th National Security Advisor, Robert O-Brien. Thanks again, Robert.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Fred. I want to thank the Foundation, my friends Roger Zackheim and John Hybush for inviting me to join you this evening. The staff has done a great job at this event. I've told others, and I know many of you have traveled around to the different defense forums, whether it's Aspen or Halifax or Munich, and they're all great, but I'm telling you, this is the premier event for national security and defense. So for the staff that puts it together every year, you're doing a great job, and thank you. I've been a frequent guest at this library for presidential debates. I brought my kids here during high school. That's how I feel bad for them that they got dragged up here, and yet they'd come here and they'd see Air Force One and Marine One, and they loved it. And so it's great for me to be back. Before we really get started, I want to say that President Trump and his entire team are very pleased today at the successful return of Xiao Wang, who is returning to the United States in the next day or two. He's free. He's in Germany at Landstuhl, and he's returning to the United States after 3 years of wrongful detention in Iran. And we will continue to seek the release of all other American citizens held captive abroad and those who are wrongfully detained in Iran. It's a high priority of the government. We also want to express our condolences, and President Trump sends his condolences to our friends in the Navy, the soldiers, sailors, Marines who have been suffered as a result of the horrible shootings in Pearl Harbor and in Pensacola. We're looking at, as Secretary Esper talked about today at lunch, we're reviewing a number of things because there's no higher priority than the safety of our men and women in uniform, especially when they're at home and on their bases. So I first saw Ronald Reagan in 1976. I was 10 years old, and he was running for president. I was up on my dad's shoulders watching him. 6 years later, I was back with President Reagan in the Rose Garden of the White House at a student conference and had a chance to meet him for the first time. His good friend, Governor Pete Wilson, I think Governor Wilson's around here somewhere, has been a mentor and a friend of mine. Governor, there's a president, first row. Governor Wilson's been a mentor of mine since I was 18 years old, and he and Gail have been great friends over the years. So it was fitting that when President Trump offered me the job of National Security Advisor in Beverly Hills a few months ago, Governor Wilson was with me, and so I'm grateful for that friendship, and you're lucky to have him involved in the Reagan Foundation. So it's great to be back here in Southern California with so many friends. I bring you greetings from the 45th President of the United States, President Trump. When Ronald Reagan took office in January of 1981, he inherited a country and a military in crisis. In the years before his election, American power seemed to be on the wane across the world. The image of our diplomats scrambling to climb aboard helicopters on the roof of the embassy in Saigon were still a fresh memory at the time. The captivity of 52 Americans held hostage in Iran for 444 days was a national nightmare. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and the communist gains around the world in the Caribbean and Central America and Africa were ongoing, and it appeared to be, America appeared to be in decline, and our adversaries appeared to be on the rise. The military that President Reagan inherited to address these challenges and threats was depleted. It was suffering from chronic underinvestment. It was beset by low morale across the force. The Navy had shrunk to its smallest size since the Korean War, while confronting a Soviet fleet that was newly emboldened in waters where it had never operated before. The Air Force operated an aging fleet of aircraft plagued by a lack of spare parts and a lack of pilots, and pilots who were there were receiving insufficient flying hours. The Army had yet to fully adjust to the realities of an all-volunteer force. Yet by the time Ronald Reagan left office 8 years later, his sunny vision for a morning in America had indeed come to pass. Through an inner toughness, his good nature and optimism, his positive vision for America's future never wavered. President Reagan reshaped the world in which we live. He became one of the most consequential and transformative leaders in our history. He laid the foundation for the peaceful end to the long twilight struggle of the Cold War by never faltering from his conviction that only through strength could we know peace. Under his leadership, the military expanded and invested in technologies of the future, the revolution in military affairs. The fruits of that revolution awed the world in the first Gulf War and beyond. The Navy, under the historic leadership of Secretary John Lehman, grew to almost 600 ships. The Air Force received the latest technology and began the production and the invention of systems like the F-22. We still benefit today from his foresight, his vision, and from those innovations. The Army and the Marine Corps were empowered with new systems and new doctrines that remain at the forefront of our capabilities even today. Like President Reagan, President Trump inherited a military that was even more depleted than the one that greeted the 40th president. From 594 ships in 1987, the Navy had shrunk to 276 ships when President Trump took office. Air Force pilots were scavenging for spare parts from museums just to keep the aircraft flying. The Army had fallen to its smallest size since before World War II, and the Marine Corps was admittedly running short of supplies and had serious readiness difficulties with its aviation. In a seminal speech at the Philadelphia shipyards in September 2016, then candidate Trump vowed to never accept the decline of the United States and its military that so many of our elites seemed so willing to embrace and to manage. He vowed to build a Navy of 350 ships, expand our modern fighter inventory, and equip the Army and Marines to meet the reality of today's threats. And he pledged to work with Congress to lift the self-defeating defense sequester that had done so much harm to our sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today to tell you that President Donald J. Trump keeps his promises. To the surprise of many, including even some in the Pentagon, those promises and those commitments he made were not normal political promises that would be quietly discarded once he took office. Like Ronald Reagan, President Trump came into office with an unshakable vision for the foundation of American power, peace through strength. In less than one full term in office, President Trump has destroyed the ISIS caliphate, and as many of you saw with pride, our special forces struck a terrible blow to al-Baghdadi. In unprecedented personal diplomacy with North Korea, combined with the deliberate and sophisticated use of show of force, he's eased tensions in the Korean Peninsula for several years, and we've gone without long-range ballistic missile test or nuclear test. He pulled out of the disastrous JCPOA with Iran and rallied a regional coalition to counter Iran's destabilizing nuclear ambitions and global support for terrorism. We're now seeing the people of Lebanon and Iraq and Iran itself protest against the theocrats governing from Guam. He began rewriting the global trading order after years of abuses that harmed U.S. interests and U.S. workers that has brought us to the brink of a historic deal with China. We've had over 150 days of record stock market closes as a result of his economic policies. He successfully encouraged our NATO allies to do what every president since Jimmy Carter has asked them to do but has not been successful in obtaining, and that is to burden share. So over the past 4 years, NATO spending outside of the U.S. has increased by $120 billion, giving new capabilities to the alliance and helping us move into the future and confront challenges such as a rising China. That number by 2024 will be 400 billion, and the number of countries spending 2% of their GDP on defense by 2024 should be 18. It's up to 9 now from 4 when President Trump took office. He withdrew from the ineffective and ignored INF Treaty, which combined with the president's new investments in defense have potentially brought China and Russia to the negotiating table for serious discussions on arms control. He left the disastrous Paris Climate Accords. President Trump understands that climate change is not a bigger threat to our security, our national security, than nuclear-armed great powers like Russia and China. He kept his promise to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel to that country's eternal capital of Jerusalem, something that both parties had been promising since the 1990s but had never instituted. In Secretary Esper and General Milley, President Trump has found leaders of the Department of Defense of courage and character who know his promises are not those of a normal politician. In nearly 3 years in office, President Trump has committed over $2.1 trillion in resources to our nation's military, has reversed defense sequestration, and has begun moving our military on a path toward a modern, technologically unparalleled force that we require in an era of great power competition. When President Trump says 350 ship Navy, he means a 350 ship Navy, and not decades from now. The national security strategy and the national defense strategy are clear. We must be ready for an era of prolonged peacetime competition with peer and near-peer rivals like Russia and China. This means not just more resources, but being smarter about how we spend and how we shape our force structure. The Marine Corps' recent Commandant's Planning Guidance is a perfect example of innovative out-of-the-box thinking about competing and winning in a complex security environment. General Berger, thank you for leading the way, as the Marines always do. The highest end and most expensive platform is not always the best solution. Spending $13 billion on one vessel and then accepting delivery of that vessel with elevators that don't work and are unusable is not acceptable. President Trump is a businessman. He knows a bad deal when he sees one. The force of the future will need to be more lethal, more agile, and more distributed. We will need to think creatively about not just how to build, but how to employ it effectively. Our military will require unmanned technology in the air, under the sea, in space, and on land. And particularly for future effectiveness, our carrier air wings will need longer strike capability. We must invest in every edge, whether it is in autonomy or hypersonics or quantum computing or artificial intelligence, and we must never be complacent about our technological advantages, especially with our near-peer competitors. President Trump has many things in common with President Reagan, from his shared belief in American greatness to his unbridled passion for the American people and their innate wisdom and common sense. Like President Reagan, I truly believe that President Trump will stand as a transformative figure at an inflection point for our country and its place in the world. But most importantly, both President Trump and Reagan are unflinching in their understanding that peace can only be earned through strength and by the courage of those young men and women who live their lives at the very tip of our nation's spear. President Trump will never waver from these convictions, and he will never stop fighting for our country that is, in Abraham Lincoln's immortal words, the last best hope of the earth. Thank you for having me today, and may God bless the United States and each of you. Thank you very much.
Please welcome to the stage, co-anchor of America's Newsroom for Fox News Channel, Bill Hemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Betts.
right.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Terrific. Have a seat there.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for your kind invitation to bring me back again this year. It's wonderful to be back here among a lot of people who become friends over the years. So thank you for that invitation. The good news is we got 15 minutes. The bad news is, as a reporter, we've only got 15 minutes. So welcome home to California.
Thank you, Bill.
The ambassador just spent time in London at the NATO summit, which brings us to our first question. What was Justin Trudeau talking about?
Hey.
You don't have to answer that.
No, I'll answer. Look,
It's your option.
I think we had an excellent bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau earlier in the day. Canada is a great friend of the United States. We've got to pass USMCA. It's great for Canada. It's great for the United States. It's great for Mexico. We need to work on 5G in Canada. There are a lot of great things that are going to happen between the United States and Canada. I think Prime Minister Trudeau was very embarrassed. I was at that reception.
No hard feelings then, right?
There's no hard feelings. He apologized to the president. The president accepted his apology. I think Prime Minister Trudeau was probably embarrassed. He didn't know there was a hot mic, and I feel bad for him.
That's the way. You're wearing a microphone too, by the way.
There we go.
There's been a lot of news in the last 24 hours, and I want to start with those. And why don't we after that, we'll hopscotch around the world. We'll hit a lot of topics you deal with every day. Pensacola. It sure looks like it was terrorism. Why not call it that?
Well, I think there's an investigation that's underway right now by the FBI. The initial indications are very troubling. We're concerned about it. Obviously, our hearts go out, our condolences go out to the victims and their families, the fallen as well as the wounded. It was a terrible situation. We're going to be looking at how we vet foreign students coming into our bases. We're going to be looking at how we secure our bases to make sure that our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen are safe here when they're at home on base. So there's a lot to do. The FBI will make conclusions of its investigation.
You dealt with this yesterday all day, did you not?
I did.
At the White House. There's reports about a watch party the night before of mass killings. There's reports that people recorded the shooting. Can you confirm all of that for?
I can't. I've seen those reports. I can't confirm it. I think the folks that can confirm it are at the FBI and the DOJ. But the reports are very troubling, and we've got to find out what happened.
Iran made a big decision in the last 24 hours. You have a lot of experience with hostage taking and deals making when it comes to bringing Americans back home. Why do you think they went for this deal now?
I think there are two things. There's somebody that they wanted that was here, and so that was fortunate for us. And I also think that the maximum pressure campaign is having a real effect on the Iranians. The Iranian economy is in very, very serious trouble. They're not able to fund their terrorist allies like Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis the way they did. Hezbollah has come out and said the golden age is over. The Iranian economy is contracting. They're selling less than 500,000 barrels of oil a day, down from 2.5 million barrels a day. They're having some trouble. So I think that they may have viewed this as an opportunity to potentially have some negotiations with the United States.
Based on the negotiation at the State Department, is there a sentence you can give us as to how a successful hostage return works? What's the key element there?
Look, every one of these situations is different depending on the country that holds the hostages, the type of leverage that we have, but ultimately it's the force of will of the President and the United States that we're willing to apply our will to the parties holding the hostages and do it in a way that does not involve paying concessions to the hostages. So in the 38 or 39 wrongful detainees and hostages that President Trump has brought home during the first 3 years of the administration, not one dime has been paid in concessions. No ransoms have been paid. We've also had to rely on our allies. In one case, there was a high price paid for hostages, but it was in the blood of 2 French commandos who were killed rescuing 2 French hostages, an American hostage and a South Korean hostage. So there is a price to pay, but we have not paid it. We're not paying dollars and cents, and we don't think those sorts of concessions are good for the country. We also think it leads to further hostage taking.
Last point here on the news in the past 24 hours, it appears that North Korea, just in the last few minutes, has confirmed some sort of test that took place at a satellite launching center in the western part of the country. Do you know of this?
I know of it now.
If confirmed and if true, it took place on the anniversary of Pearl Harbor. And they seem to pick these dates. July 4th was one of the dates that's been used in the past. Christmas is coming up. Is there a level of concern within the administration that Chairman Kim would try and test yet again an ICBM?
Look, there's always a concern with North Korea. We monitor it very closely. North Korea has been a concern to presidents since North Korea invaded South Korea. So it's something that we monitor very closely. When President Trump came into office, President Obama told him that the single largest challenge he would face in office is North Korea. We're on a path towards war with North Korea. I think President Trump engaged in some really phenomenal personal diplomacy to ratchet the pressure back and reduce the tensions with North Korea. We obtained a commitment from Kim Jong-un to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. He has not lived up to that commitment. We are pressing him very hard to live up to the commitment. The president's had 2 additional summits with him since he made the commitment. So we'll have to see what happens. But we're working very hard diplomatically to keep the tensions low, but also convince Kim Jong-un to honor the promise that he made and the commitment he made.
Another question on this too, and this is hypothetical here, but if you denuke the peninsula and if you remove the 25 to 30,000 U.S. forces there, in a second term, would President Trump take that deal?
All right, look, when you talk about a deal with North Korea, there are going to be a lot of aspects to the deal. So you pointed out a few potential pieces of the deal, but we do want to reduce nuclear tensions in the region, and if we can get North Korea to truly denuclearize in a way that is verifiable, that would be a huge win, and we'd certainly look at how to get a deal like that.
Let's go past the last 24 hours and let's jump around the world a little bit now. We can do this in a lightning round or however you prefer. I know these folks are hungry and they're probably thirsty too.
You've got a lawyer standing between you and dinner. That's not a good situation.
I'll do my best, counselor. China. They steal our technology, the forced transfer. It's a real issue. You're dealing with high stakes here. This has worked very well for Beijing for a long time. Why would they choose to bend now?
Well, they'll choose to bend because President Trump was the first president in 40 years to stand up to the Chinese, and he put tariffs on them. A lot of people were opposed to the tariffs. It turned out the tariffs worked beautifully. The Chinese were devastated by the tariffs. Their economy has not grown at the rates they expected. The supply chain is moving to other countries. I was in Bangkok for the East Asia Summit and the ASEAN Summit. The supply chain is moving to Vietnam. It's moving to Thailand. So the Chinese want a deal. And we think we're very close to a phase 1 trade deal. It's a trade deal that would protect American intellectual property, protect our technology, that would give relief to the farmers and open the markets to farmers. It would open the markets in China to American financial corporations. If we can get that deal, it would be, as a phase 1 of a trade deal, it would be a fantastic deal. I think that we're going to get there, but if we don't, the tariffs that have been announced will go into effect, and we'll deal with the Chinese a different way.
Russia. What do you think the truth is about our election in 2016?
Look, the Russians are a malign influence. The Russians have always attempted to interfere with the United States, to run propaganda campaigns against the United States. There's no doubt that the Russians, and I think this is something that's a consensus, the Russians attempted to influence the U.S. election. I don't think the Russians having a bunch of trolls running around on Twitter actually had any effect on the U.S. election. I don't think they had any effect at the counting of the ballot stage. And I think the American people kind of made up their mind that they wanted to elect President Trump. So did the Russians attempt to influence the election? Yes. Did they have any success doing it? I don't think so.
Conversely, what do you think the level of involvement was on behalf of Ukraine?
Yeah, I just don't know. I see the same reports that everybody else is reading. Some people say that there was an attempt by the Ukrainians to elect Hillary Clinton because they thought she would be better for Ukraine. Other people say that's not the case. We'll just have to wait until we hear the report of the Inspector General, until we get the prosecutor's report and anything else that the Department of Justice is looking at.
Do you buy into the CrowdStrike theory?
You know, I just don't know. I don't have. Here's the thing. We spent a whole number of days, and unfortunately I was too busy to watch much of the impeachment testimony. But all I saw when I watched it was speculation, double and triple hearsay, and policy differences. So you know, what I'm not going to do is speculate, talk about policy differences with the past administration, or engage in hearsay because I heard somebody on TV say something that they heard somebody else say. What I can tell you is what I did see personally, and that was in 2014 when I went to Ukraine as an election observer for the parliamentary elections. And I had young Ukrainians coming to me saying, we're going to the front lines. Can we please have lethal aid? Can we please have flak jackets, Kevlar? Why is America, the arsenal of democracy, not helping us? In fact, kids who were going to the front line and who were volunteering would crowdsource, not CrowdStrike, would crowdsource a bulletproof vest. They'd raise enough money from their friends. One of the kids would drive up to Poland and would buy Kevlar, and they'd bring the Kevlar down, and at the going away party for the soldier, they'd be given a Kevlar vest. So that changed when President Trump took office, and the Ukrainians did receive lethal aid, and they're now able to put up stronger resistance against the Russians. So that's what I saw with respect to Ukraine. I saw no aid going to Ukraine, or no meaningful aid going to Ukraine, until the president took office.
Three more topics. ISIS. You were in the Situation Room when Baghdadi was killed. I am told that he was being tracked with great accuracy for a period of 5 to 7 months. Why then choose to take him out on that date in late October?
So I don't want to get into operational details, and I can tell you that the men and women, the quiet professionals that work for other government agencies in our government did a unbelievable job. And when the director said that this was the time to move and that they had a fix on him, the president made the decision to move, and we brought in special forces to launch that assault at great distance behind enemy lines under very difficult circumstances because of Turkish, Russian, Syrian anti-aircraft assets that were on the ground and going into a very, very hostile area. And those men went in and did an incredible job.
Quick follow on that. October 26th is the date that he was taken out. Were you concerned that Baghdadi's forces would link up with the remnants of al-Qaeda in that part of Syria, yes or no?
Yeah, I don't think we were necessarily concerned about that, but what happened on the ground is we saw he was in an area that was considered more of an al-Qaeda area or an al-Nusra area than an ISIS area. And we did see that some of those forces attempted to come to his aid during the attack, and that did not end well for the folks that tried to rally for him.
2 days ago, you were on Special Report with Brett, and you said the president has, quote, great instincts. Give our audience an example of how you see that or how you've witnessed that yourself.
So number one, the president looks at every question that comes to him, whether a national security or foreign policy perspective, is what's the best thing for the United States of America? And that's the lodestar. Now, he may make decisions that help an ally. He may make decisions that where the United States is going to have to carry a heavier burden than those who are helping. But his first question is, what's the best thing for the United States of America? And I think that's why the American people instinctively understand that the president is on their side, is because he's looking out for them. The other thing is he's incredibly concerned about our men and women in uniform. One of the things he talks about with reverence, but also with real disappointment, is how hard it is on the families when he goes up to Dover. And I've spent time with him at Dover to receive our fallen heroes who are brought back with great dignity, and our the Air Force folks up there doing a tremendous job. But it's a difficult experience to meet with the families and then receive our fallen heroes home. That's had a real impact on the president. So he thinks long and hard before committing American troops or putting them in harm's way, because he knows he's seen firsthand the price that we have to pay for the work.
How do you keep up with him?
Hey, it's pretty tough.
Yeah, I bet.
He's 20 years older and has twice the energy I've got. So
Good luck, tiger strength.
It really is impressive.
Last point here. You said you were 10 in 1976?
That's correct.
My math had you at 11, but corrected.
I'm old enough, don't give me that.
I get it. In 1975, when Governor Reagan, I think it's an appropriate question to end our discussion on here, he left the governor's office in Sacramento. Can you give us an anecdote or a point in your life where you noticed that he made a difference to you, either as an American or perhaps politically, or shaped your worldview?
Well, look, I was fortunate enough as a young person to come back and intern in Washington. That's how I got to know Governor Wilson, and was able to see Ronald Reagan up close, not as close as I see the president now. It was usually on a rope line as he was walking out to the helicopter. And unlike the president today, who will go and engage the press at the line, President Reagan, as you remember, used to cup his ear and yell at Sam Donaldson, "I can't hear you, Sam." And so I saw a lot of that. But I'll tell you what really had an impact on me was, I remember in 79 and 80, I was in high school watching the hostage crisis. And my dad had been a Marine Corps officer, and the hostage crisis just infuriated my dad. He couldn't believe that we weren't taking stronger action against the Iranians, and that they had the temerity to hold 52 American diplomats hostage that entire time. And one of the things that we would hear from my dad, his friends, my parents, was that wait until Ronald Reagan's elected, this will end very quickly. And as we all know, during the inauguration, as the president was being sworn in, the Iranians got religion very quickly, released the hostages, and they were brought home. I also thought it was incredibly classy that President Reagan had President Carter greet the hostages when they came home. He knew how important that was to President Carter. But that had a huge effect on me. And look, it was President Reagan's character, his integrity, his steadfastness that I think sent a message to the leaders in Iran that this was somebody not to be trifled with, and that this sort of behavior would not stand under a Reagan administration. And they released the hostages. That's peace through strength. Now, we didn't have our military forces built up to the place that we needed them to be, and President Reagan eventually accomplished that. But there's no doubt in my mind that had the Iranians not acceded to his demand that the hostages be released, that they would have been punished, and it would have been tough on them.
Thank you so much for your service.
Thanks, Bill.
And thank you for your time, Mr. Ambassador.
Great being here.
You bet.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you.